All right, guys, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Retic Lounge. We're your host, Nathan Katz and Lucas Bagnara. This is episode what, Lucas? 33?
34.
34. All right. Yeah, I'm losing track now. That's a good sign.
Right.
So,
Chugging along.
this is going to be kind of a controversial one in, I think, a lot of people's eyes, but we're going to be talking inbreeding versus line breeding this episode.
I hope everyone got the reference on the thumbnail. If not, we're not creeps. But yeah, inbreeding, line breeding, I think
Speak
we
for
have.
yourself, Lucas.
I'm not a creep. Um, yeah, I think that there's a lot of good information to talk about, both from the good side and the bad side. Or, I mean, not even good or bad, right or wrong. We'll let you go ahead and drop those comments down below on what you think is appropriate. Um, I know for a lot of animals and a lot of different species out there, it's kind of a common thing. But with retics and the Lacey Act ban and us not being able to import, at least especially from like the locality standpoint, it can be something that is controversial to talk about. So before we jump into all that good information, again, just thank you guys so much for your support. I want to remind you, we're at the time of recording, we're close to 500 subs on YouTube. Once we get to 1,000 subs, we are going to be doing a VivTech Products basket giveaway. I have talked to Erica and Ryan, and we're going to put together a basket of goodies for you guys. We are going to support VivTech and buy those products from them with our code, but we're going to buy them nonetheless, and we are going to have them ship out this gift basket to one lucky winner once we get to 1K. Again, thank you guys so much for those of you that follow and like on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. And Nathan, talk about USARK before we jump into this. A lot of recent things that have been coming up.
Yeah, I've been super busy with work, so forgive me, but I haven't kept up on my emails. I need to go through them tomorrow when I have some time. But I know there's been a lot of hearings, a lot of public discussion on some of the bills that have been going through on USARK. Make sure you're a member if you're an animal keeper of any kind. They help any of us keeping reptiles, amphibians, fish, birds, anything you can think of. So make sure you're a member today. Use our link below.
Right. I actually just bought 2 bronze memberships for 2 people that purchased snakes earlier in the week. So that was the first time I got to do that. Cool experience. I forgot who we had on that did that. Chris McVicker.
Well, and that's the other part of our giveaway is we're going to be doing for every 100 after that,
That's
we're going
right.
to be giving away some bronze memberships to USARK, making sure that we have some of our supporters as members of USARK.
Right. All right. So, we're going to jump into this right after I cough right now. If you guys can't tell, my voice isn't doing well. All right. So, inbreeding, line breeding. Nathan, what do you know about the difference even between the two? Is there a difference?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, inbreeding is going to be a much more closely related animals. So, inbreeding's breeding is a breeding strategy that's going to be used where you're breeding, parents to siblings or
Siblings to each other.
siblings to each other, offspring to the parents, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where line breeding is where you're using an animal that has some genetics from the animal that you're using, but a little bit further away in the family tree. A good example I have is I'm using a phantom male. He's het for albino, and that strain of albino in super dwarfs traces all the way back to a Canadian breeder. So, although it's a small connection, there is a connection there.
Right. It's kind of like also like if someone is making super tigers, right? And let's say you have a tiger that you bought that's like 6 years old, and then you decide to buy another tiger down the road that was not like even from the same parents, but we know that tigers came from, that tiger gene that was imported in the 90s. That's a form of like line breeding in a sense, right? But and yeah, I mean, I think that those are great ways to differentiate how closely they're related, but then also kind of like the purpose, right?
Well, and
Um,
with importation closed here in the US, with any of the morphs that we have, you can trace them back to the original animal. When it comes to albino, you can trace it back to Bob Clark. The Indo-Caramel stuff, you would have to probably educate me on that, but I'm sure you could trace it back to a single animal that was brought into the US or a group of
yeah.
animals.
Yeah, and there's some we've had different type of like I know there's a Baldogo line A males, and then there's another line that also came in with A males and stuff. But yeah, ultimately like most of the more stuff that's out there is it's all related and connected in some way. And I think that's why I really was inspired to do this episode was to discuss like the ethics surrounding it and making sure that we are doing the best that we can as retic keepers to uh not breed recklessly and just like continue to take babies on together without like a really specific purpose, because line breeding and inbreeding I think both have a value. There are a lot of people that are like strictly against it. I've actually talked to some other locality people, and I, I mean they've told me things like, oh, if you take siblings together, like don't even message me again, right? Or like if there's no genetic diversity and you continue to breed them and then you make them available and then people start like they feel very strongly about that. And I don't necessarily blame them. um but there's I'll use Halmahera for example, right? We only have a pair of wild caught Halmaheras that are producing the babies that are out there. And to say that anyone who buys a Halmahera can't breed to produce Halmaheras, like I feel like that's not really a fair statement to do. But you want to be responsible with how you do it, right? Like
Of
for
course.
example, I'll make pure Halmaheras from siblings that I have, um, but I won't sell pairs to people, right? Just to make sure that no one is taking it down a third generation of inbreeding. Now they can always go out of their way to find someone who has one and breed it, right? But that's just a way that I'm going to do my due diligence to make sure I'm just not like, here's a pair and given that impression of like, let's just continue breeding siblings and siblings and siblings. Um, but when you have a locality specifically that if you don't do that from time to time, they'll be wiped out of the U.S. Um, you got to kind of preserve them, right? I don't want to see Halmaheras or
Tombolongans.
coyotes or tombolongans. I don't want to see them go, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, they have a place, and I think just the biggest thing is making sure that we're breeding for the strongest animals that we have as a representation of that bloodline,
Right.
especially when you're bottlenecked like that.
Right. And I love that you mentioned that because like I had this like planned in my head on how I would talk about this, but it completely left my mind and you're bringing it up. Um so I don't know whether to name drop or not, but someone in the Superdwarf community has actually gone to these islands and have seen how these animals on Calato and stuff live in separate cave systems throughout the island. And one thing that this person proposed was that this family, this cluster that lives in a single cave system, they are all breeding within each other and are likely all related. Um, every once in a while, I'm sure there'll be another animal that comes by that's unrelated that gets fresh bloodline that's within there. But the idea that on Superdorf Islands, because it's such a small island, they're more than likely all related, right? And so I think it's given this false pretense, and this is where that's all the information about this individual. Everything that I'm about to say moving forward is my thought. Um, hasn't once been said by that other person, but my thought is that um, that information could be a little misleading to people in the sense of like, oh well, since they're all related on the islands here in the U.S. in captivity, we can just inbreed and we can or line breed and it's not going to have a negative consequence. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that in the wild, natural selection is a part of everyday living. The strongest of
Natural
the
selection, and you're talking the same amount of time, if not longer, to get to sexually mature adults.
right, right. And so in the wild, there's like the strongest don't survive, right? Survival of the fittest, natural selection that happens in the wild without a doubt. Here in captivity, most breeders are force feeding their babies to try to get them to survive. Um, they're cleaning the mold off of the eggs and they're going through these very drastic measures to make sure that all the babies survive so that they can, for whatever reason, I'm not going to say that, only to make a buck, because at the same time, I know the excitement of having a clutch and I want every baby to survive. So during my first two clutches, I did fiddle with eggs, and I did try to do everything I could to make all the babies survive. I did, in my first clutch, have to force feed animals. I didn't have to, I chose to, but my line of thinking has changed since then. And so here in the US or in breeders in general, we don't really allow natural selection to take its place like it does in the wild. And even if we try to, it's still not going to be as effective as it is in the wild. So eventually, I think we run into some problems if we just continue to breed, uh, sibling to sibling, with locality stuff and even with morph stuff, right?
So do you want to kind of jump into like pros and cons of just inbreeding since we're there right now?
Yeah, I'll knock off a few, and then if you want, you can jump in with some more. Let's start with pros. Is that cool?
Yeah. So it's
Okay.
first is you're able to produce consistent and predictable offsprings with the traits that you're going for. So any of those desired traits with siblings to parents or sibling to sibling, you're able to predict a little bit better what those babies are going to look like.
Yeah, I'll give an example. So a lot of Calatoas, and what a lot of people like about Calatoas is that a lot of them have a solid dorsal stripe down the middle of their back. And so if you want to enhance that and make all those babies have that thick dorsal stripe down the middle of its back all the way to the tail, you inbreed. You take sibling to sibling that have that strong feature to that strong feature, and you enhance it through generations, right? That's polygenic thought process. We have a video on breeding with a purpose, so you can check out that link that we'll
I
drop in the description.
I think of some of the most popular lines of Kalatoa. Those wouldn't be possible without inbreeding.
Yeah, yeah. Talk about the TK line and things like that. That's so yeah, polygenic traits is like one of those pros. You see what you want from that clutch and you pair those siblings together and you continue to enhance it and you selectively breed for a specific trait. That's definitely a pro. What other pros?
So it can be used to produce new morphs or different color patterns.
Yeah. I think a good example of that, because I don't really consider it a codom. I know that there's still some work on trying to figure it out, but
Mm-hmm.
like Krispy Kreme, right?
Krispy
So if you look
Kreme,
at
or say you take any of the new morphs to a pure female and breed the 50% hets, the siblings back together to produce
oh
visuals.
yeah, duh. Okay, true. Right? So you're going to start to see a lot of that as like the Hypo project and the Ocelot project and the Anthrax project start to make their way into Superdorf.
Shh.
Shh. As they start to make their way into Superdorf, you're going to see people holding back clutches, taking siblings together to create visuals, right? And that typically, when you have a new recessive project, that's how it works, right? You have to, at some point, do some inbreeding, in addition to line breeding down the road, to get that project established. And it's done with mainlands too, with the Ocelot or Rainbow or Arcoiris, whatever you want to call it. It's all in order to get the population of them that we have now, you had to do inbreeding and line breeding. You had to put them together in order to make it work. Um, I think another,
Unpopular opinion, I say ocelot.
I do too. Um, so on that topic, I feel like depending on who, like I have one, but I feel like if I bought it from someone who, like I wouldn't, but if I bought an animal from Prehistoric Pet and I got a rainbow from them and he calls them rainbow, I would probably call them rainbow just because it's coming from that person. That's what they call them. I got mine from Aubrey. Aubrey calls them ocelots. I call them ocelots. But I will say I do refer to all of them as ocelot. But like if I bought a rainbow from Jay, I would probably call it a rainbow.
Yeah, I think it can kind of muddy the waters. I understand the point of you know it's line breeding in the end of the day, and that's what we're talking about. So
Right. I don't get the reason for the different names. It's,
yeah,
I
if
mean,
they were
whatever.
so distinguishable between the three, I think it would be a little bit easier
Yeah.
for me to justify it. But for just morphology's sake, I feel like I stick to ocelot.
Right. It's the same thing as like Bob Clark calls his Platinum's Fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That
Okay.
took me
So,
forever to figure out.
right. I was
So
like, what the hell's a fire? Um, So another pro is I was just talking about that being able to conserve or the conservation efforts of a specific locality.
Yeah.
And for those of you that like are big in conservation and things like that, I'm not talking about like truly conserving to go release in the wild and like building up, but I'm talking about just like to prevent a locality from being washed out of the U.S. because we can't import. Um, so, any other pros before we jump into the cons? And before we jump into the cons, I do want to do our sponsorship plug.
Uh, None that I can really think of right now.
And we're talking about inbreeding, correct?
Yeah, right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if I have any more pros, I'll come back to it. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead, give our sponsors their moment. Thank you so much for sponsoring us. We appreciate all of you. And we'll be back after that. Whether you're just getting into retics or you've been breeding for years, the first place you want to visit is Stewart Design. More and more breeders keep showing up at shows, on Morph Market, and all over socials. Sometimes it may feel impossible to get anyone's attention. Stewart Design helps small businesses like yours do big things through brand clarity, helping entrepreneurs to start and scale businesses that are easy to know and love. Their work can help any company or industry, but they've done a ton of work for ours. Stewart Design created the brand for USARKs, Canova, Reach Out Reptiles, Coiled, and dozens of other well known reptile breeders. Like many of us, the owner of Stewart Design, Blake, is a keeper and breeder who fell in love with retics. Although Stewart Design does a lot of corporate work, Blake has a passion for working with people in the reptile industry. So, wondering if Stewart Design is right for you? Stewart Design can help if you're just getting started or you're ready to take things to the next level. Maybe you're struggling to stand out and build your presence online or at shows. And maybe you don't want to be like the other guys or get lost in the crowd. You want to make your own way doing what you love. You might just have a big idea and know your business is special, but you need help sharing it with the reptile community. If something here resonates with you, reach out to Blake. Have a conversation with him. To learn more or get started, visit sdidentity.com or call them at 855 SD Logos. Clear brand, own markets, Stewart Design helps create them. If you are in the market for an enclosure for your reticulated python or any other one of your reptiles, Focus Cubed Habitats is your one-stop shop for not only the best looking cages on the market, but also provide amazing features and add-ons to your cages. We partnered with Focus Cubed Habitats because they continue to innovate and change the way we house our animals unlike any other caging company out there. Their cages are designed intelligently and provide the most stylish and secure housing for your animals' comfort and well-being. Visit focuscubedhabitats.com for your animals' caging needs. Again, visit focuscubedhabitats.com for some amazing and stylish enclosures.
We also want to thank VivTech Products for being an affiliate sponsor of the Retic Lounge. Stop by VivTech Products for the best UV spectrum lighting on the market that will enhance and improve your snake's overall well-being and health. Visit vivtechproducts.com and use the code ReticLounge23 today for 15% off. Again, visit vivtechproducts.com and use our affiliate code ReticLounge23 today for 15% off. All right. So you want to jump into the cons now?
Yeah. And I feel like these cons can probably be generalized to also line breeding.
Yeah, I feel like you can kind of intermingle both the pros and cons here, but uh, it just depends on how you use either of them.
Right. So cons. Number one, harmful recessive genes that can take place. Or harmful genes in general. So, for example, you take a golden child to a golden child, get a super golden child, not a good snake, right? Um, and when we're talking about inbreeding, again, because we are not using natural selection, we are increasing the chance of like genetic makeup not being strong,
You,
creating weaker
you could
offsprings.
you could consider it a hidden recessive gene in terms of a mutation that you don't want in the snake.
Right.
A good example is the tongue issue that you get with super tigers, or
Even
some.
tigers. A lot of
Yep,
tigers have like a tongue flick where like it only goes out just a little bit.
yep, tigers. Some of your fatal combinations, like your super golden childs. Um, let's see. There's a couple other the black-eyed leucistics, which are usually a fatal combination. So,
Yeah, which is a lemon glow to a lemon glow. And again,
mhm.
lemon glow is another word for platinum, which is another word for fire. So we know what we're doing here in the retic industry. Um, so yeah, the black eye leucistic, digestive tract issues, that struggle. I know that there are some people who have successfully kept adult, black eye leucistics, but generally speaking, they don't thrive. They don't do well. And I don't know about you, Nathan, but I've gotten to a point now where I even made a video for Patreon today while I was candling my uh, ocelot to tiger endocarmal eggs.
Mhm.
Um,
Speaking
and
of, how are those?
they're great. Uh, the 28th of this month is going to be day 84. Eggs still look nice and full. There's only one that there's a clutch of 25, and only one has some discoloration that just started popping up. So still has a chance to hatch with less than 30 days left, or it could be for whatever reason the embryo died in the egg, and now the egg is just slowly going bad. So we'll see. But the other eggs are perfectly white, look beautiful, candling well. We even got to see some a little when I candled one of the eggs. You could see one of the heads kind of like move across. Have you seen that before?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool.
In fact, I was on just a little Discord chat. I had to miss our Zoom meeting this last week, but jumped on with some people a couple days later and candled some eggs from my purple albino to phantom head albino clutch. And, you know, only had one egg go bad out of the 22, and the rest candled really well. Saw all the little embryos developing at the bottom of the egg. So I'm
Which is
excited to candle them in a couple weeks and just see the growth.
really cool because your female laid on day like
55.
55, man. And I was panicking when my female laid on day 50.
Yeah, everyone I've talked to, that's one of the latest clutches I've ever heard.
It's
So
pretty late, man. Um,
but luckily all the eggs look good. I'm excited to see what pops out of there. See how healthy the babies are. That's, I think, my biggest worry, just with how this year went. I think it's really due to cage temperatures. I think I've talked about that already, but we'll see how it goes and keep everyone updated here on the lounge.
yeah. So we were talking about, I think what sparked the conversation was my ocelot and endocarmal, and we were talking about, oh man, we're not good at breaking away.
No.
Or at least I'm not.
but we need to get into the cons. That's all I know. So let's
Yeah,
lead us
cons.
off. So it can lead to a decrease in the genetic diversity and an increase in harmful recessive genes, like we were talking about.
Yeah,
So we kind of already let off on that. It also may result in reduced fitness and health of the offspring over time. So if you keep inbreeding and keep inbreeding and keep inbreeding, you're going to run into a wonderful whites of West Virginia kind of a situation. Your snakes, instead of hissing, are going to start barking like dogs. They're
right. Right.
they're
Maybe
going to have buck teeth.
maybe instead of using a U.S. state, maybe we'll just refer to like the Brits and
No,
their.
we'll just insert a picture of the wonderful whites of West Virginia, because everyone will understand after that. That's a great documentary, but
If you haven't watched it, it is.
that is inbreeding at its finest, folks.
Yeah. So, and again, that goes back down to that statement I said early on. Like, survival of the fittest is a real thing in the wild. In captivity, when everyone is trying to make every animal survive, you're just not going to be able to control if you keep inbreeding, the negative long term effects. And to me, I feel like in captivity, things are sped up so much quicker than evolution does in the wild. And so it happens, I think, a lot quicker in captivity. So,
Yeah,
a lot of
because we're
people,
forcing the hand. We're not
right,
we're not allowing anything
right.
else to happen.
Right, like a lot of people use that for the superdwarf argument in terms of like, oh, well, it took hundreds of years for these, superdwarfs to get that small. Why do we think that we'll get them big real quick in captivity? And it's like, well, that's because we're feeding superdwarfs pigs, and we're feeding them big rabbits, and we're feeding them animals that are twice, three, four, 5 times the size that they get on the island. And it's not that we're doing that in a like it's not everyone is doing it in an unhealthy way, but at the end of the day, you can, in my opinion, you might disagree, you can reverse that evolution much quicker by going back to feeding it prey size items that it would generally find on a mainland island and not on Kalatoa.
Yeah, it's an interesting theory. I just really don't know.
Yeah. Um, okay. Yeah. So, um, also, I mean, one con, and I mean, I guess it's not a con, it's more of a rant that I have. Um, like if you're going to inbreed, do it with a purpose. That we mentioned on some of those pros,
Make
but
sure you have healthy, super strong animals.
right. And also, if you're inbreeding, just because you don't want to spend more money to diversify, like if there is diversity out there and you're refusing to get it and you're just breeding to breed, not a good thing to do. Like what we have in the US with retics is what we have. I know that people are probably importing these things still to this day, but at the end of the day, what we have in our gene pool here is what we have, especially locality wise. And it's not wise for you to continue to just do a TK Kaltoa to a TK Kaltoa and just keep doing that. Find other bloodlines out there, diversify, branch out with the money that you get from the animals that you're able to sell with your first pairing and clutch. I feel like it's common sense, but I just had to throw that out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So now let's talk about line breeding, which is a little bit different. And Nathan, go ahead and just cap what line breeding is again so that we could just start off this topic.
So line breeding is going to involve individuals that are related, but not as closely as related in inbreeding. So this is going to help maintain certain desirable traits or characteristics within a bloodline while still maintaining a certain level of genetic diversity.
Yeah. So a good example of that we talked about earlier is um, so you can also use line breeding as polygenic, and I know that we talked about that with inbreeding as well. But with line breeding, you can do that as well. But ideally, what's happening with line breeding is you're taking an animal to another animal and they're unrelated, right? Um, and you're taking those offsprings over to uh, other unrelated animals, but at some point down the line, you are crossing it back to a related animal because you see a specific trait that you want, and you're trying to hone in on those attributes. Um, or it can be done also unintentionally, right? Again, if you're making super tigers and you got animals that were unrelated by parents and grandparents and even maybe even great grandparents, like for the tiger end of the spectrum, but you're making super tigers. So you're taking a tiger to a tiger, and the tigers are all related in the US.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, you know what? When we get Bob Clark on here, it'd be interesting to hear that. If anyone knows, drop it in the comments. If anyone knows if there was more than one tiger that was imported. To my knowledge, I think it was just the single tiger. Um,
Well, and same goes with Clark albino. It was
right.
all back to that big female that was imported by Anson Wong.
Right. So those are good examples of line breeding, right? Like if you are producing visual albinos, you are taking either hets or visuals together, and those purples all came from. I think we had a lavender that was imported, um, and yeah, so that's an example of what line breeding looks like. So, what are some of the pros of line breeding?
So, just let's see. I mean, line breeding just first in my mind, right off the bat, is going to be uh, just the increase in genetic diversity that you get within the animals while still going for a certain look or trait.
Yeah, um, and It's pretty useful when you want to fix a desirable trait. Um, and what I mean by that is just taking it back to the original line in order to. So, like, I'll use this for example, marbles, right? Some people liked really striped out marbles. Other people liked the more chaotic marbles, right? Um, and so, when you start to breed marbles down and you continue to make marble offspring and you start to get these striped out marbles, you might end up taking it back to that original one that was more broken out, pixelated to enhance that, right? If you're like not liking how the stripe is looking, you could take it back to the original, one of the non-marble offsprings or a marble offspring, um, and take it down the road to get back to the roots of what it is that you like.
Yeah. Want me to go on the next one?
Sure.
So you can produce some consistent and predictable offspring again with line breeding. So it gives you a certain level of consistency while not having to involve a whole new bloodline while working with a specific trait.
Yeah. Um, and I mean, if we talk as far as like cons of line breeding, um, they're going to be relatively the same as
Yeah,
they are with,
really.
uh, yeah, with inbreeding. And so, rather than honing on that, I want to hear from you, Nathan. Like, just your personal opinion, what you are trying to do, what are you trying to avoid when it comes on the topic? Like, I want to hear kind of your perspective on that.
I could give a really specific example. So, I have a pair from my 2021 clutch. It's a male and female. They're both Golden Child Platinum, Sun Tiger, Het Snows. I may have forgot something. Um, but there's a few reasons why I wouldn't take them together. Super Golden Childs being the number one reason.
Don't want to do that.
Um, but then I have some line breeding kind of plans with them. So I have a female that has the same genetics as my purple albino from different parents. She's an anery, 75% Calitoa, 12.5% Jampea, hopefully proving out the albino this year. But I'm going to take the male from the purple albino to the anery instead. So it is still line breeding within in there. And I guess in a sense of inbreeding as well, because it's still within that family tree. But it gives just a little bit of separation within the bloodline. So I'm not taking him straight back to mom.
Right.
I could
Um,
take him straight back to mom just because they're both very strong animals and I could feel good about it. But since I have that other animal at my disposal, I would feel much better about taking him to, the cousin of that snake.
yeah. I remembered what I was talking about with the uh, ocelot pairing and like what I was, remember when I blanked out
Glad
a
to
long
jog your memory,
time
buddy.
ago. Right. So thank you. We were talking about the topic of inbreeding, and I remember we were talking about like the necessary evil to do that in order to establish like superdwarf versions of recessives, and so um, talking about like the ocelot, and when you're taking it to other animals, like my localities, in order to make visuals of that locality, I need to take those siblings back together. Um, unless I have the capability of I mean, no, even then it would still be line or inbreeding, like but taking siblings back together to produce a visual ocelot, ternate, or coyote or calico. But then even if I use that same locality but like an unrelated animal and then took those babies together, they're still 50% related, right? So
Yeah,
that's
hate it or love it. Anyone working with reticulated pythons, especially in the morph side of things, there's a level of inbreeding or line breeding that goes on within their program. It's just a necessary evil. Now it's just the ethics and how you do it.
right. Now, what's really cool is that once you create that project that you've worked hard and you've line bred for, or you've inbred for, I feel like your next sole responsibility is to diversify that bloodline. Find something unrelated find another codon to put with that recessive, try to find ways to make as little bit of that family connection as you absolutely can. Um, that's just my opinion. It's not something that I'm saying that people that do that are not doing the right thing, because everyone has their own vision in terms of what they're seeing. But ultimately, it's just making sure that you're not selling weak offspring, right? Because of the impacts of line breeding or inbreeding.
Any other cons that you can think of that might be a little bit different than just straight inbreeding?
Uh, no, not really. What are your thoughts on like inbreeding locality stuff with like the lack of?
I think I've mentioned kind of my thoughts on it already. I feel like for Tom Belongan, it's
Oh,
necessary.
that's right. Yep.
Although the bloodline there is so bottlenecked that I don't know how long those animals are going to remain strong and a viable option in breeding programs unless we start out crossing them to other localities, morph projects, things like that, just to
Yeah. I
kind of
think
help
the
the animals. But
yeah, I
that's
think the
going to take
best
away some of those traits of the Tom Belongan that everyone loves.
right. I think the best way to go about that, like if we have to at that point, um, Tom Belongan being right off the island of Solaire and those being Saputrii subspecies, taking that Tom Belongan to the Solaire is probably the closest that you're going to ever get to producing a Tom Belongan like animal.
Hmm.
And then, taking,
Then you
so
want to almost line breed for size after that.
yeah, line breed for size. So, I mean, if you do like, you take a inbred Tom Belongan, you take it to an unrelated Solaire. Now you have 50-50. You can then take that to another unrelated Solaire, then take that back to the Tumbleongan. So you're back at 50-50. And you're just, again, bringing in new blood. Um, and yeah, and then eventually you could take that and try to increase the Tumbleongan to get to, I don't know, 87.5, 93.75 to try to get that high percentage, as much Tumbleongan in size of the Tumbleongan as you can. It still will never be a pure, but I think look wise will be pretty damn close.
Yeah, I think that's a decent option.
Yeah, but for me as a purist, it's that it wouldn't be the same for me, but it's again a way to visually have a similar looking animal without bottlenecking the project out.
So then, same question for you. How do you plan to implement both line breeding and inbreeding within your collection? Do you have any plans for either of the two?
Yeah, so I actually did my first inbreeding this year, which you yeah, pretty sure it's inbreeding. So there's a rumor that my Kayuwadi came from wild caught parents that at one point produced a visual Anri Kayuwadi. I never saw proof of pictures of this Anri Kayuwadi. I thought it was a bunch of BS, to be honest. Um, but then close buddy of ours, hold on, got a cough. Close buddy of ours bred a Kayuwadi female from the same clutch as my female to a platinum Anri Kalatoa and produced Anri animals, like clear as day Anri. So I was like, okay, so this exists. And so my female hatched in 2018, and I took a male from the same parents. From so an F1 male that was produced in 2019 from the same wild caught parents. So they are siblings, but not from the same clutch. And I took them together to try to prove out the anery. And so that was my first instance of inbreeding. But if I inbreed, it's going to be for things like that, like establishing a brand new anery locality in the U.S. Right? Like that's a pretty big deal. To get anery Kayuwadis that there's a folk tale about one existing that no one has ever seen pictures, never knew it existed. But then when we found out that, you know, uh, that line does carry anery, I wanted to try and prove that out. So that was important for me to do. Again, I'll produce pure Halmaheras at some point. I'm not in a rush to, but those will be from siblings. because again, there's only one wild caught pair. But that's just because I love Halmaharas and I know a lot of people like them, and why not make a little bit more available?
And I know you
Um,
have some line breeding plans, so maybe just one or
yeah.
two of your line breeding plans.
So line breeding. So taking um line breeding. Well, I mean, I guess what we could consider line breeding is taking a man that never gets old watching. Taking different localities with the ocelot gene, combining them together, and definitely utilizing ocelot in terms of line breeding. Um, man, sorry. Was there anything specific you were thinking of? Because right now I'm kind of drawing a blank.
I mean, I'm sure you have line breeding plans if you were to really think about it. I don't have anything specific in mind. Um, like a good
Oh, my marble. I have a 50% Philippine, 25% Kalatoa marble. That looks better than any platinum marble I've seen because she has so much gold. And so I'm going to use her to create marble offsprings and keep breeding those down to make them smaller with smaller localities. And then eventually taking those babies back to that one. Like if they start to get less yellow, I'll eventually take it back to the mom of that
so
project.
so what locality are you going to use to try to continue that yellow look?
Um,
That would be a great example of line breeding.
yeah, my Philippine stuff. My Kayuwadi is super yellow.
That's what I
Um,
figured.
yeah, so Kayuwadi, Philippine, and then even some of the offsprings of my F1 Kalatoas that I have, the female that I have is super yellow too. Has like pretty rich golds. So yeah, line breeding, good example. Polygenic traits, trying to selectively breed for that color. I want to be able to continue to produce those vibrant gold marbles without including platinum, so that my normal marbles make platinum marbles look meh. Not saying that's gonna happen. I'm not saying that from an arrogant manner, but like just in terms of polygenic like vision that I have, that's what I'm going for.
Okay. Yeah. An example of line breeding for me, just long-term goals that I have. If I produce some really cool, say, albino phantom tiger stuff this year, or just albino phantoms, then I think it would be really cool to take a male back to the female that I've been raising the last 2 years. She's got 2 years on her, a male's got 2 years on him to really get to a good breeding place. So I think it could be cool to run that project back together. And it's kind of a mix of inbred, line bred, but more on the line bred side.
Yeah, I almost caught myself. I muted myself for one word and then I unmuted myself before you could call me out. Um, so yeah, it happens. Now to like do it intentionally over and over again without a purpose or drive, that's where it gets finicky. But yeah, I think that's all that we really can cover.
Well,
You
and I just want to say like a good example of breeders being ethical in the inbreeding line breeding thing just over the years within reticulated pythons is you don't see a ton of people trying to produce black-eyed Lucies, and you don't see a ton of people trying to produce super golden childs and all these morphs that can have some problems. There's a couple new morphs on the horizon that are showing that they're having some genetic problems, and that's why you're not seeing them pop up in everyone's collection quite yet.
right,
So it's going to take a decent amount of ethics and making sure that we have strong animals to make sure that you know these things can continue being in our collections. But not everyone's going to have a black-eyed Lucy. Not everyone's going to have a perfectly healthy super tiger.
right, exactly. It's a really good example of just the responsible aspect inside of that thing. All right. So, for the sake of my throat, if you don't have anything else, I think now's a good time to tune out.
Yeah.
For those of you that stuck out and watched this episode, comment down below. This was useful for you. Ways that you implement it, things you have against it. Again, love hearing that feedback and replying to your comments. And again, that plug down below, patreon.com. Go ahead and join our Discord. We are getting really close, or are at 60 members. But again,
Probably around 75. We'll do another round of TRL merch and get that sent out.
yeah,
That was a lot of fun. We had, 30 or so people that ended up getting shirts. So it'll be cool to, see pictures, be able to post on the stories, show off.
yeah. If you guys have any merch ideas, let us know. Beanies, hats, I don't know, underwear. Let us know.
Couches.
Couches. TRL couches. All right, guys. On that note, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. We will catch you next Friday on our next episode.
And for Zoom. And Lucas is dying. Goodbye, everyone.